When a home feels heavy, it is not always the walls that are tired, nor the air that is old. It is something more subtle, something that cannot be seen but can be felt the moment you step inside. A silence that feels dense, a mood that presses on the chest, a quiet discomfort that has no clear name. Many search outside for answers, yet the root often lies within what has been left unresolved. There is a simple teaching carried through generations of silent observers of life. Every space remembers. Not in a magical sense, but in the way energy lingers where emotion has been strongest. Arguments that were never truly resolved do not disappear, they echo in behavior, in tone, in the way people enter a room and feel suddenly uneasy. Worry, anger, grief, and constant stress do not vanish when the voice stops speaking, they settle into the rhythm of a home. And so a home becomes heavy not because of objects, but because of what those objects have witnessed. A place where harsh words are spoken often begins to feel sharp even when no one is speaking. A place where sadness is repeated begins to feel dim even in bright sunlight. A place where fear is common begins to feel closed, as if the air itself is reluctant to move freely. But there is a secret that changes everything. Nothing is permanent in its state. Just as water becomes still when not disturbed, energy also settles when gently guided back into balance. The first step is not force. It is awareness. Walk through your home slowly, not with judgment but with presence. Notice where you feel lighter and where you feel resistance. Some corners will feel open, others strangely tight. Do not rush this noticing. A heavy home reveals itself only to a quiet mind. Then comes release. Clutter is not just physical, it is emotional memory made visible. Items kept out of guilt, broken things never repaired, unused objects stored for later, all hold fragments of the past. When a space is filled with things that no longer serve life, it begins to feel like life itself is stuck. Letting go is not loss. It is permission for new energy to enter. Even a small clearing, a table, a corner, a shelf can begin to shift the entire atmosphere of a home. Because energy responds not to size but to intention. Next is movement. A home that never breathes becomes heavy. Open windows, allow air to pass through, let light reach areas that have stayed covered for too long. Light is not just brightness, it is renewal. Air is not just wind, it is continuity. When both move freely, stagnation cannot remain. Then comes sound. Soft sounds have a way of dissolving what silence has compressed. Gentle music, calming tones, or even the simple act of speaking kindly within the home begins to reshape its emotional memory. A home learns from what it repeatedly hears. If it hears frustration, it holds tension. If it hears peace, it slowly becomes peace. But the deepest layer of heaviness is never in the space itself. It is in the minds of those who live within it. A home becomes heavy when people carry yesterday into today, when resentment is not spoken but stored, when forgiveness is delayed, when stress from outside is brought in and never released. No cleansing of a space is complete without cleansing the heart. Sit in stillness even briefly within your home, not to escape the world but to return to yourself. Let thoughts pass without holding them. In that small silence, something subtle begins to shift. The home and the mind start to align again. And in that alignment, heaviness dissolves. There is no need for complicated rituals or external solutions. The truth is simpler than most expect. A home becomes light when life within it becomes simple, honest, and aware. Clean the space, yes, but also clean the attention you give to it. Clear the clutter, yes, but also clear the emotions you continue to carry into each room. Open the windows, yes, but also open the parts of yourself that have been closed for too long. Because a home is never separate from the people who live in it. It reflects them. It absorbs them, and ultimately it becomes them. When the mind is calm, the home becomes calm. When the heart is clear, the home becomes clear. And when both are free from what no longer belongs, even the heaviest space begins to feel like light is living inside it again. A heavy home reflects emotional energy. The feeling of heaviness in a house often comes from unresolved emotions like stress, anger, sadness, or conflict that linger in the space. A home does not become heavy overnight. It is a slow gathering, like dust settling in corners that are rarely noticed. At first, everything seems normal. Life continues, routines remain the same, and nothing appears wrong on the surface. But gradually, something begins to change in the way the space feels. The air seems less fresh, conversations become shorter, patience becomes thinner, and even rest does not feel fully restful. People living inside may not immediately understand why they feel more tired, more irritable, or more emotionally drained in a place that is meant to give comfort. Yet the reason often lies in what has been silently accumulating over time. Every home carries the emotional imprint of those who live within it. It is shaped not only by physical objects, but also by the unseen atmosphere created through thoughts, emotions, and repeated experiences. When stress becomes a daily companion, when arguments happen frequently, when worries are constantly spoken or silently carried, the space begins to absorb that pattern. It is not magic, but repetition. Just as a room can smell of food after cooking, it can also carry the emotional smell of human experience. Over time, this creates a sense of heaviness that cannot be easily explained but can be strongly felt. In such a home, even silence feels different. It is no longer peaceful but dense. A person may sit in a quiet room and still feel unsettled, as if something unfinished is present. This happens because the mind inside the home is not truly at ease. External silence cannot heal internal disturbance. When inner thoughts are restless, the environment reflects that condition back in subtle ways. This is why two homes with the same design, same furniture, and same cleanliness can feel completely different. One feels light and welcoming, while the other feels tight and uncomfortable. Clutter also plays a powerful role in this experience. Objects that are no longer used but still kept carry emotional weight. They represent past decisions, past identities, and sometimes past regrets. When too many of these accumulate, they begin to occupy not just physical space but mental space as well. The eyes see them, the mind registers them, and slowly a sense of stagnation develops. Nothing feels fully new because nothing feels fully released. In such environments, even small tasks can feel tiring because the surroundings subtly reinforce a sense of being stuck. Human emotions are deeply influential in shaping the atmosphere of a home. Joy, gratitude, and kindness create openness, while anger, fear, and frustration create contraction. When difficult emotions are not processed but instead repeatedly expressed or suppressed, they do not disappear. They linger in behavior, in tone, in reactions, and in the subtle energy of daily life. A home becomes a container for all of this. Without awareness, people continue adding to the weight without realizing it. The most important understanding is that this heaviness is not permanent. It is not a fixed state. Just as it is created gradually, it can also be released gradually. The process begins with awareness, simply noticing how a space feels without judgment. From there, small acts of clearing, both physical and emotional, begin to shift the atmosphere. A single cleaned corner, a moment of honest silence, or a release of old attachment can begin to change the entire feeling of a home. Over time, as both the space and the mind become lighter, the home begins to feel alive again, not because something new was added, but because what was heavy was finally allowed to leave. Spaces remember experiences through energy, and a home absorbs the emotional atmosphere created by the people living in it, and repeated negativity can make the environment feel dense and uncomfortable. When a home feels heavy, it is often because the flow of life within it has slowed down without anyone noticing. Life does not remain still on its own, it either moves forward or accumulates residue from what is left unresolved. In many homes, people focus on cleaning what is visible, yet the invisible atmosphere is left untouched. Over time, this unseen layer becomes stronger than the physical condition of the house itself. Even a clean room can feel uncomfortable if the emotional energy within it has become dense. This heaviness is closely connected to the rhythm of daily living. A home reflects the emotional pace of those who inhabit it. When mornings begin with stress, when conversations carry irritation, and when evenings end with mental exhaustion, the space slowly adjusts itself to that pattern. It does not judge or resist, it simply absorbs. Just as a sponge holds water, a home holds the emotional tone of repeated experiences. If that tone is consistently heavy, the entire environment begins to feel weighted, even when nothing physically has changed. One of the strongest contributors to this condition is unspoken emotion. Many feelings are never fully expressed or understood. Frustration is held back, sadness is ignored, and worry is carried silently from room to room. These emotions do not vanish when ignored, they settle into the background of awareness. Over time, they create a kind of emotional fog inside the home. People may not identify it directly, but they feel it as lack of motivation, discomfort in staying at home, or a sense that something is off without knowing why. Another layer comes from repetition without renewal. When the same thoughts, routines, and emotional responses repeat every day without change, the energy of the home becomes stagnant. Even small spaces begin to feel closed when nothing new enters emotionally or mentally. This is why people sometimes feel relief simply by changing the arrangement of a room or by introducing small changes in their environment. The physical shift creates a mental shift, and the mental shift begins to clear the emotional stagnation. A heavy home is also shaped by attachment. Objects kept not for usefulness but for memory hold emotional weight. Each item carries a silent story, and when too many stories remain unclosed, the present moment feels crowded by the past. The mind keeps revisiting what is no longer needed, and the space begins to feel like it has no room for new energy. Releasing these attachments is not about loss, it is about making space for life to move again without obstruction. Natural elements play an important role in restoring balance. Fresh air, sunlight, and open movement disrupt stagnation. When windows remain closed for too long, both air and emotion become trapped in stillness. But even a small opening can begin to shift the entire atmosphere. Light has a way of revealing what was hidden, and air has a way of carrying away what no longer belongs. Yet the deepest transformation does not come from external actions alone. It comes from the inner state of the people living inside the home. A calm mind naturally brings lightness to the environment. A forgiving heart softens the atmosphere. A peaceful presence changes the emotional texture of every room it enters. When inner tension reduces, the home no longer has anything heavy to hold on to. In the end, a home is never separate from those who live within it. It is a reflection, a mirror that quietly responds to human emotion. When awareness increases, heaviness begins to dissolve on its own. Nothing needs to be forced. Slowly, the space begins to breathe again, and what once felt heavy starts to feel open, alive, and quietly peaceful. Clutter blocks energy flow. Physical clutter represents emotional attachment and past energy. Letting go of unused or broken items helps restore balance and freshness. A home that feels heavy is not always a result of visible disorder or lack of cleanliness. Often it is something far more subtle, something that cannot be wiped away with physical effort alone. It begins when the natural flow of life inside the home becomes interrupted. Every space has a natural rhythm, a quiet balance between activity and rest, between expression and silence. When this rhythm is disturbed repeatedly, the home slowly loses its sense of lightness, even if everything appears perfectly arranged on the surface. One of the main reasons this happens is emotional repetition. Human beings tend to cycle through similar thoughts and reactions every day, especially in environments where stress is common. When worry becomes a habit, when frustration becomes a default response, and when mental pressure is carried from one day to the next without release, the home begins to reflect that cycle. It is not that the walls absorb emotion in a physical sense, but rather that the behavior and energy of the people living inside shape the atmosphere continuously. Over time, the environment starts to feel dense, as if the air itself is holding on to something unspoken. In such spaces, even ordinary moments can feel heavier than they should. Sitting quietly may not bring peace, but instead a sense of unease. Rest does not fully restore energy. Conversations may feel shorter, not because there is nothing to say, but because there is a lack of emotional openness. These are subtle signs that the internal state of the home has shifted. The environment begins to mirror the unspoken condition of the mind. Clutter adds another layer to this heaviness, but not only in a physical sense. It is not just about too many objects, it is about incomplete emotional connections to those objects. Items kept out of obligation, guilt, or memory create a silent weight. Each object becomes a reminder of something unfinished, something not fully released. When these reminders accumulate, they create a sense that the present moment is crowded by the past. The home begins to feel like it is holding more history than life. There is also the influence of emotional suppression. Many people avoid expressing difficult feelings in order to maintain harmony, but suppressed emotions do not disappear. Instead, they settle into the background of daily life. They appear in mood, in tone, in silence, and in the energy between people. A home where emotions are never fully expressed or acknowledged can slowly become emotionally stagnant. Nothing feels openly wrong, yet nothing feels fully alive either. The environment responds strongly to small changes. A shift in lighting, a clearing of space, or even a change in daily routine can begin to loosen the heaviness. This is because the home is always reacting to movement, both physical and emotional. When new energy enters, even in small amounts, stagnation begins to break. However, the deepest source of heaviness is always internal. The home is closely tied to the mental state of those who live within it. When the mind is crowded with unresolved thoughts, the space reflects that density. When the heart carries unresolved emotions, the atmosphere mirrors that weight. No external change can fully transform a home unless there is some degree of inner release. True lightness begins when awareness returns. When a person starts noticing their thoughts instead of being controlled by them, they begin to realize that their thoughts are not in control. When emotions are felt instead of avoided, and when attachment to unnecessary burdens begins to soften, the energy of the home naturally begins to shift. The space does not need forceful cleansing, it needs conscious presence. Gradually, as inner tension reduces and external clutter is released, the home begins to breathe again. What once felt heavy starts to feel open. What once felt stagnant begins to move, and what once felt unclear slowly becomes peaceful, as if the entire space has remembered how to be light again. Air, light, and sound restore harmony, opening windows, allowing natural light. And using calming sounds help remove stagnation and bring movement and freshness back into the home. A home feels heavy when the natural flow of life within it becomes interrupted by things that are left unresolved. It does not happen suddenly, nor does it announce itself clearly. Instead, it develops quietly, like a shadow forming in a corner where light does not reach often. At first, people may only notice small signs like tiredness when entering the home, a sense of discomfort in silence, or a feeling that rest is not as refreshing as it should be. These signs are often ignored, yet they are the earliest reflections of a deeper imbalance. Every home is shaped by the emotional presence of those who live inside it. The thoughts they think, the emotions they carry, and the way they interact with each other all contribute to the atmosphere of the space. When these interactions are calm, respectful, and mindful, the home feels open and light. But when stress becomes constant, when communication is filled with tension, and when emotional expression is either excessive or suppressed, the environment begins to adjust itself to that pattern. Over time, this creates a feeling of heaviness that seems to exist in the air itself. One of the most overlooked causes of this heaviness is emotional residue. Arguments that are never truly resolved, sadness that is never fully expressed, and worries that are constantly carried but never released all leave an imprint on daily life. These emotions do not disappear simply because time passes. Instead, they continue to exist in subtle ways, influencing behavior and shaping the tone of the home. Even when everything appears normal on the outside, the internal atmosphere may feel unsettled. Physical space also plays a role in this experience. When a home becomes filled with unnecessary items, the energy of movement becomes restricted. Objects that are no longer needed but still kept create a sense of stagnation. They represent moments in time that are no longer active but still occupy attention. The mind, even unconsciously, registers this lack of flow. As a result, the environment begins to feel crowded, not only physically but emotionally as well. There is also the effect of routine without awareness. When people move through their days mechanically without presence or intention, the home begins to reflect that lack of vitality. Repetition without mindfulness creates stagnation. Even small actions, when performed without awareness, contribute to a sense of dullness in the environment. In contrast, when actions are done with presence, even ordinary moments begin to bring freshness into the space. Lightness returns when awareness is restored. It does not require dramatic change, but rather a gentle shift in attention. Noticing how a space feels, becoming aware of emotional patterns, and allowing small releases to take place naturally can begin to transform the atmosphere. Opening a window, clearing a surface, or simply sitting in silence with full awareness can slowly break the cycle of heaviness. Ultimately, a home is not separate from the people within it. It reflects their internal condition with quiet honesty. When the mind is burdened, the home feels burdened. When the heart is restless, the space feels restless. But when awareness enters, even in small amounts, the heaviness begins to dissolve. The home does not need to be fixed as much as it needs to be understood. And in that understanding, it slowly returns to its natural state of lightness and peace. Inner peace is the real cleansing force. The most important step is calming the mind and releasing emotional burdens. Because the home reflects the emotional state of the people living in it. A home feels heavy not because something is physically wrong with it, but because something within its flow has become stagnant over time. It is a gradual process, often so slow that those living inside do not notice it until the atmosphere begins to affect their emotions and energy. What once felt like comfort starts to feel like pressure. What once felt like rest begins to feel like fatigue. This shift does not come from a single event, but from many small, unnoticed accumulations of emotional and mental residue. Every home is continuously shaped by the inner state of the people who inhabit it. Thoughts are not silent in their effect, they influence behavior, tone, and interaction. When the mind is filled with stress, even silence becomes tense. When frustration is carried throughout the day, even simple conversations feel heavy. Over time, these repeated emotional patterns begin to define the atmosphere of the home. It becomes less about the structure itself and more about the energy that is repeatedly expressed within it. One of the most important yet overlooked factors is emotional incompletion. Many experiences inside a home are never fully resolved. Words are spoken in anger but never repaired with understanding. Feelings of hurt are ignored instead of acknowledged. Worries are carried quietly without being released. These unfinished emotional cycles do not disappear, they remain a subtle tension within daily life. The home, in a way, becomes a container for all that remains unresolved. Alongside this, physical clutter plays a deeper role than most realize. It is not just about having too many objects, but about the emotional attachment tied to them. Items are often kept because they represent memories, identities, or past versions of life that are no longer active. While each object may seem harmless on its own, together they create a sense that the present moment is overcrowded by the past. This prevents the space from feeling fresh or open, both physically and mentally. Another subtle cause of heaviness is the lack of conscious living within the home. When daily routines are performed mechanically without awareness or presence, the energy of life becomes dull. The home begins to reflect this absence of mindfulness. Days blend into each other without renewal, and even positive experiences lose their brightness when they are not fully felt. Awareness is what keeps a space alive, and without it, stagnation slowly builds. Natural elements such as air and light play an essential role in restoring balance. When windows remain closed and movement is limited, both physical and emotional energy can become trapped. Fresh air brings change and light brings clarity. Even small moments of opening and allowing nature to enter can begin to shift the atmosphere of a home. Yet the deepest source of heaviness always lies within the human mind. A home cannot feel light if those who live inside it are carrying unresolved emotions. The external environment is always a reflection of the internal condition. When the mind is crowded, the home feels crowded. When the heart is unsettled, the space reflects that unrest. The transformation begins with awareness, noticing the feeling of a space without judgment, observing emotional patterns without resistance, and allowing small acts of release to take place naturally all contribute to change. A cleared corner, a calm breath, or a moment of genuine stillness can begin to shift what feels heavy. In time, as inner and outer clutter is released together, the home begins to return to its natural state. The heaviness fades not because it is forced away, but because it is no longer being sustained. What remains is a space that feels open, quiet, and gently alive, as if it has finally remembered how to breathe again.